I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. Teams and leaders struggle not with what is said, but with what is unsaid. Great employees leave, problems get unsolved, projects derail, and customers jump ship. In fact, 80% of workplace problems are sourced back to a lack of honest communication. The reason why we hold back is fear, the fear of how others will respond. We actually train people to be dishonest and to hold back the unsaid by rewarding silence and not rewarding total transparency. Steven Gaffney is a leading expert on creating consistently high-achieving organizations, which he calls CHAO, including high-achieving teams, honest communication, and change leadership. Steven has worked in more than 25 different industries and market segments for over 25 years. He uses cross-discipline solutions and best practices from other industry sectors to bring fresh, innovative, and consistently successful approaches to his clients. He works directly with top leaders from Fortune 500 companies, associations, as well as U.S. government and military associations. He is also an author, speaker, and trusted advisor. Steven Gaffney on the Business of Intuition. So, Steven, it's great having you on the Business of Intuition, and I'm delighted to have this conversation. We're sort of brothers of a different mother, so to speak. I think we're in the same industry in many ways. You being on the East Coast there in Washington, D.C. area, and we being in the Phoenix area. And I wanted to ask you sort of a start-off question. When you think about all the work that you're doing, you've got some great clients. You know, you mentioned Marriott, you mentioned Cox, you mentioned other things as well in our conversation before we started this. Is there a kind of like a burning message, a kind of a throughput that says, if I could just get people to understand this, what would this be? What are you trying to say to the people that you're working with? I know you've got a book at some point coming out, you've written before, very successful at what you do. You've been around the block, but what is the thing that you like, gosh, I wish they would just get this?
Just be honest would be my key message. But it's not where you might think, and often people might think, I'm not talking about ethics. The biggest challenge is lack of honest communication. But again, it's not the ethics on people lying. It's actually the biggest problem is not what people say. It's actually what they don't say to each other. It's what they leave out. That is the big frustration for most executives, most CEOs that I work with, even mid-level. I mean, all employees, the frustration often is, why didn't they just tell me? If they just told me, I could have done a lot better job. And executives and CEOs I work with, often the frustration is they don't want to get surprised or blindsided. And if people had just told us what the issue was, we could have fixed that in a fraction of the cost and actually very, very quickly. So the big message I want to get across, and I love your question to tee it off, let's get right into it, is lack of honest communication. But what I'm really talking about is getting the unsaid said. If they can do that, you can fix almost any problem.
I think we got to call this podcast episode Getting the Unsaid Said. So we just named it, Steven. There you go. That's your through. That's great. So I totally agree. And I think intuitively people would agree with you and resonate with what you just said. What are the costs to teams and organizations, customers, maybe even communities, if you want to go that far out, when the unsaid is not said?
Well, all you have to do is open the news, right? And you see companies where they're surprised and blindsided by issues that employees had done or people just didn't know about. And just look at the news, but scan the news through, why didn't they just say so? And you'll you'll start to see that even people that do things that aren't the best, it's the cover up, it's that thing. But that's really kind of in the news, maybe even politics, all kinds of stuff. But really what I'm talking about is just day in and day out. It's hugely costly. I mean, just think about how often we just say, why didn't they just tell us? An example might be we lose a great employee and they walk out the door and you think, well, wait a minute. If that's what the issue was, we could have done something about it. Or a problem on a program or contract, that's a big issue. So to put it in kind of nuts and bolts terms, there's a guy who wrote a book years ago called The Human Element, and his name is Dr. Will Schutz. He subsequently has passed away, but he did a lot of research around this. And he found out that 80% of workplace problems, 80%, so that means 8 out of every 10 problems are sourced back to lack of honest communication, or I would just say to getting the unsaid said. That's staggering. But here's the real big kicker. When I do these sessions and I focus on with executive leadership teams and culture and whatnot, so often when we follow up, they'll say, that was really great and very helpful in the workplace. But, I'm using this at home. I'll give you an easy example of this. I was doing a session and a gentleman came up to me afterwards. He said, I wish I had known about this. And I never really thought about it. I said, what's going on? He said, my wife has informed me she wants a divorce. And he'd been married for 25 years, had 5 kids, and has 5 kids. And he said, and the worst part about it, besides the divorce, is he didn't even know his wife was unhappy. Now, I did ask him. I challenged him a little bit. I'm like, how can you miss the boat on that kind of? And he said, I work so hard that I just stopped doing the very thing that makes a good marriage, listening and talking. So, a lot of times, getting the unsaid said, are we even at home to hearing the message? Do we even probe? Do we even ask? And then do we get defensive when people say things that we don't like? So it's whether it's the marriage, whether it's the team, whether it's losing great employees or a major program that's gone south, it all sources back to lack of honest communication.
All right, you're on it, man. You got me at hello. Okay, so there's so much to this. You've got it. I think you're on it. So why? And I know that's a big loaded question. Why is it? Let's just take organizations. Why are 80% of workplace problems, which you just said, as a result of not getting the unsaid said? Why don't we communicate these things? Why are we holding back? What is the characteristic? What's the DNA? What's the source of the why we don't be honest? Or why do we hold back what's honest? What is that about?
It's a great question. And it all comes down to the number one reason is fear. Fear of retribution, fear it's going to go on somebody's list. They're not going to forgive us. They're not going to let it go. It's going to hurt our career. It's fear. So it's fear of also how we look. Because here's a really kind of twister kind of a thought, something you may not think about. Often high achievers suffer from this. And you would think, well, they're high achievers. Yes. But a lot of times I've worked with people that when there's something that went south, the leader who has made a hero or has often achieved many things figures when there's a problem, we're somehow going to get this done. And I don't want to worry other people. So if I let people know, it's a fear of like, I'm going to show weakness. It's a fear that, like I need help. And how am I going to look? And so what they'll do is they'll try to work on it, but then things get worse, not better. And so I see this not only with obviously low achievers, but even high achievers. It's very prevalent of human nature to be afraid of what somebody else might think of us. And so we hold back. But here's also an interesting part. It takes much more psychological energy to keep something inside than to let it go. For example, have you ever had something you wanted to say and then you're like, oh, I'm worried, right? Fearful. How is it going to be received? Anyway, so you actually have a conversation and it goes well. If it goes well, you're like, wow, that was relieving. Right. I feel less stress. And actually, it's great. So this tells us something. People want to tell us the truth if we create an environment of emotional safety. And I'm using that word emotional safety, not psychological safety, which is most of what's out there. So there's also going to fly in the face of what's.
So what is the difference between? Sorry for jumping in, but
no, it's okay.
So, and I know, I forget the name of the gal that kind of coined that phrase, psychological safety, Edmondson or something. What is it how would you differentiate the difference between emotional safety and psychological safety?
So here's my interpretation. Somebody might say, well, that's not how I would look at it, but here's mine. Psychological safety is too cerebral. And so emotional safety is a gut level. So here's the difference. You can know that nothing bad is going to happen when you share something or it will be safe. You can get that cognitively. But the question is, do you feel safe?
Mm.
And so a lot of times somebody will say, but we haven't penalized people for speaking the truth. There hasn't been that happen. And I'm like, I understand that, but maybe it was their previous job. Whatever the case is, human beings are emotional. They're not logical. And people might say, but that's not true. And we make decisions on emotions and we justify with logic. Think about it this way.
Good point.
And I'll tie it all together. So you buy something at a store spontaneously. You're driving home and you think, well, I deserve that, right? You already bought it, but now you're trying to justify it. Now, it tells us something. We made the decision on emotions and we needed the logic to justify. You need both. But here's the point. If we just come at people from a logical angle and say, you can share anything, they need to feel safe. So I want to drive home the point. It's about emotional safety, not necessarily psychological safety.
I love that. Decide on emotions, justify on logic. I think that is a great thing to continue to remember. So therefore, is there, go ahead. What were we going to say?
I was going to say something else because I might anticipate what some people might say, but that's not true. I make a lot of decisions on logic. For example, I do a lot of work with engineers, scientists, and technical folks as well. And I'll say, no, you look at all the evidence. And then when you feel that way, and you may not think of it this slowly, you're going to make that decision. I'll prove it to them in a different way. Have you ever presented a lot of data, made a very logical argument, and still the person won't move? Still, they won't take action.
Right.
So that emotional element is extremely important.
So, all right. So many different things to follow up here on this. So let me just see if I can track and follow on one of them. When it comes to your analogy, let's say that we're creating a series of, we're setting up an argument for something, and we're using facts as a reason for that. We're using logic as a reason for that. Like you're talking about in healthcare, they say we're going to be an evidence-based decision-making healthcare organization. We're going to make decisions based on evidence, based on logic, right?
Yes.
How does that then fit into this idea that we decide on emotions if we have all these systems and processes that said, whatever it might be, that's going to be, we decide, we have so many things within our business systems and our toolkits that say, how do you make decisions? Evidence, justification, logic. Somebody would say, like, well, wait a minute, where does emotion fit into this? How do you place emotion in a system that so reinforces justification for decisions?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of fact-based decision and fact-based culture. In fact, there's a distinction that I work a lot with companies on, distinguishing notice versus imagine, but it's all around fact versus opinion and pulling that apart. So facts are critical. So I don't want people to say, well, he's moving away towards it's all emotional and gut feeling. No, we have to do that. And I actually think that's critical. So here comes the but part. The but part is we have to connect with people emotionally. Think about it this way. When the leader you like to follow, it isn't the person who's going to stand up there and bombard you with a lot of PowerPoint data. In fact, you might lose consciousness, right? I'm just kind of kidding, but you'll just kind of disconnect from the message. But if they were to say, look, all this data, but let me tell you a story. And they told a story of how, let's say, a hospital system was able, through this process that we've established, and it's very logical and fact-based, saved a life, and it made a huge difference in someone's life. And somebody who was designated to, probably percentage-wise, to die, but we used our new process, and as a result, the person lived. Then that story is the one they're going to remember, and that's where we connect. Think of the greatest speakers of our time. They all pointed out to hit us emotionally. And I'm going to give you the best example ever. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. He had no PowerPoint slides. That's an important thing for people to remember anyway. But he also had no statistics, zero statistics. And it's known to be one of the most influential, greatest speeches of our time.
Yeah,
so that tells us something.
Simon Sinek talks about it in his famous TED talk about the golden circle, that he was saying that it wasn't I have a plan speech. It was I have a dream speech. And that there's a certain part within our brain that we listen to those things that connect to our emotions. And then we use our logical side of our brain to justify the decision we made based on those emotions. So I follow you. I get it. I emotionally connect to you, and I get what you're saying. So let me go back to something you said before, Steven, about this idea around that 80% of these issues seem to be around the unsaid, and that fear is the reason why we do not disclose, and that if we were to create a safe emotional environment, and that includes trust, obviously, that we would be able to open up the floodgates of what we already want to say, but we're holding on to so much. So the last few years has been a bit interesting. One could say we've been through 3 years of fear. Now, one could say that any sort of time in history, fear is part of the human condition. But there has certainly been a healthy dose of fear, been part of a lot of people's lives because of the pandemic and so forth. When you think back on where companies have gone over the last few years, do you feel that organizations as a whole are more emotionally safe now, or are they less emotionally safe now as somewhat a result of what we've all gone through? Has it gotten better or worse? Have we pulled together? Are we pulled further apart? Is it safer to be more truthful, or is it less safe?
Well, all I can say is with my clients, definitely more safe, right? That's what I do and developing that culture. What I do think is we often will attribute, there's definitely events that happen to us, right? Whether we're talking about the COVID situation as I say, it's often the great reboot. It wasn't the great resignation. It's people reevaluating their life.
Yes.
There are things where we go through that is fearful. For example, if we got fired for speaking up, if something bad happened to our career because we let other people know, if we had a difficult conversation at home and the person flips out. In fact, I always laugh, if people say, have you ever met somebody who says, I love honesty, please give me honest feedback. And they ask you a question and then you give them critical feedback and they flip out on you. Next time they ask you for feedback, you're like, no way, I'm not going there. In fact, it's interesting. We train and condition people to lie to us by our reaction or their reaction to us. That creates that whole thing. So, but to directly answer your question, I don't know if it's worse or better. I do know it's a prevalent state of a human being in many organizations to be afraid to speak up because we're worried about things. Now, here's my other interesting thing to prove that people want to speak up. Look at children. Children tell us something. When you look at a group of children, they're telling you everything, right? They tend to, and then adults say, oh, don't say that, or say that. Don't say this. And so not speaking up is a learned behavior.
Yes.
It's a learned behavior. So what that tells us, if we create an emotionally safe environment and we reward honesty, which is another critical element, a lot of organizations create that safety, but you know what? They don't do anything with the information. For example, they might do employee surveys, but they take forever to get the information back to the employees. Right. And so people might feel now safe, but why bring it up? Right. So there's a lot of elements in that, but I do think that events happen, whether we're watching it in the news or personally, that can impact us. But I don't like people to use that as an excuse because there are things that we can do immediately to get people to speak up. And that's why I'm brought into organizations. And this is not just meant as sales pitch, it's what people can do. You create that emotional safety environment and they will immediately start speaking up. I do that immediately with organizations, but people can do that too. You just create that emotional safety, you reward honesty and some other things that we're talking about.
All right. So I love it. And again, this is why we're so connected on this topic, because I agree with you and we do similar work, but I want to sort of think about our listeners here.
Yeah.
They're thinking, okay, we want to create emotional safety. How do I do that? I'm a manager of a team. I'm living in a culture within an organization that has wonderful value statements that we have plastered all over the break room walls. Maybe even I have a CEO that he or she, espouses why this is important. We might even have some phrases within our value statements that talk about honesty and being transparent. And we bring this up in meetings and so forth, but we don't do it. How do we translate the word being honest, being, creating this safety? And how do we do it? What is the tips? What are the tools that somebody listening can say, okay, now I got something that I can go and implement today? What would you say?
So first of all, I would say, and this kind of overall kind of global way of thinking, no excuses. So culture is local. And most of the time we talk about culture as a company, but my experience is culture is very local. What I mean by that is, you can get it conceptually and the CEO is speaking about one thing, but my immediate person I'm reporting to, how are they reacting to if I speak up? So what we need to do is there's many, many strategies. So I'll rattle off a few that is really impactful. First, I want to kind of review and then expand. So create that emotional safety. So as a leader, and people are going to follow the leader. So our immediate leader or who we're leading. And also we lead, and leadership is we lead up, we lead down, and we lead across, right? So if we want people to speak candidly, right? So for example, I've worked with leaders or executives, I might say, who are afraid to speak candidly to somebody who's reporting to them, and they don't give them good feedback because they're afraid of the reaction. In fact, one thing I've noticed is poor performers receive poor feedback. Poor performers receive poor feedback. So we've got to look at that reaction. Are we getting defensive? And if we do, we got to clean that up. So that emotional safety. Second, reward honesty. You got to do something with it. It can't just be, thank you for sharing. That was very, very helpful, very informative. Okay, what the person is thinking, do something about it. Have you ever had a friend who asks you for advice, but they don't change anything in their life? And eventually they ask you again, and they complain about their husband or their wife or situation. And they say, well, what do you think? And you're thinking it's a waste of time because they're not rewarding you with the honesty. In other words, but if they took your advice or forms of your advice or ideas you share and they do something with it, that's a form of reward. So is that making sense?
Yeah,
so
no,
we want to reward
it makes
honesty.
sense. And I get it. You would also, people behave in the areas in which they are rewarded or in the way in which they are measured. So if we want to reward transparency and honesty and saying the unsaid, then people will actually then be more encouraged to do it in the future. I'm thinking about a particular person right now that I'm actually know that they has been elevated to a higher level within an organization, has gotten a lot of feedback and actually has sought out feedback. And I think as far as I can ascertain, the feedback has been honest and given with love and given with clarity around the intent behind it, but the behavior never changed. So poor performers receive poor feedback. Let me take issue with that and see how you respond to it. Can you give good feedback and the person still becomes a poor performer because they're not taking that feedback and doing anything with it?
Yes, but here's the but. And I mean, I've been at this for over 25 years. When I ask people to relay their conversation that they had, they usually don't give that person really actionable feedback. Here's the difference. If I said to you, so you need to respond better to your coworkers. We need to have more collaboration. That's concepts. It's not very specific versus, so my feedback to you is, and my suggestion is you meet with that other department once every month and build that collaboration. That's specific. So what often is missing with feedback is specific, tactical, as well as strategic advice. And then if that doesn't change, this goes back to my first point in getting the unsaid said, which is, I notice we have several conversations and I've noticed you've asked me for feedback. And I've given you this feedback and this feedback, but I also notice nothing has changed. What's missing? What's missing? How could I better help you? What kind of feedback would you like to receive? And what you may find out is they're not getting the unsaid said. And the thought is, I got it, but I didn't think it was really that important to change. Or, yeah, I can see that, but you don't understand. Right? So now they're really saying, I'm right and you're wrong. And so that needs to get addressed, which we could talk about. So I want to come back to its really key point is getting the unsaid said. So if something isn't changing, we have to get the unsaid said. And I say this because often somebody isn't getting that feedback. Now, I will say to your point, sometimes we give feedback, we say this, and some people are in the wrong job, or they're not going to change, or they don't want to change, or they don't want to put in the extra work.
And I know I'm looking for the potential outlier on all this. And I completely agree with the process by which you were espousing. I just think that there are sometimes situations, and I'm thinking that people might be wondering this too. We've done this. We are doing this. In all honesty, we really reflected well. And the person, one, has not said the unsaid. So we don't know what's going on, even with the right questions that you just shared. Or they still are, mismatched. They have a value system that doesn't align. We can be a representative of saying the unsaid, but they just, for whatever reason, and this is, let me back up the bus a little bit. Yeah. There's a gal on our team who had developed through her graduate degree or her doctorate degree a tool around being able to sort of determine, does this person need coaching or therapy? And sometimes I think, it's something that coaches, I think, are always wondering in the back of their mind. Are they coachable, right? And I think employees and managers have that same idea. Is this person coachable? Can we actually help them? And sometimes there is, occasionally, the history, the issues that might be, long-term in their life are preventing them from and allow them to be so triggered so often that it prevents them from moving forward. So I can create the best environment possible. I can do all my personal growth work and all that sort of stuff. And still, it may not work because the other person has their own process. And it may not be that they can be transparent right now because of whatever history that's holding them back. What do you think about that?
I think it's important. In fact, a few thoughts on this. First of all, I always advise people to coach behaviors, not thoughts. People can have whatever thoughts they want, but I can coach the behavior. And so that's really critical. So somebody could say, well, I don't know that I believe that this is the right move. Well, that's okay. But if I'm leading or managing, the question is, will you do these behaviors? It's the behaviors that we can do, right? They can have whatever thoughts. The other thing is, I think it's, you do want to see what's the right move and are they changing? So, because on the other hand, I will share with you this, after 25 years, I've never seen the following thing. I've never seen a leader or a manager or supervisor make a personnel move and said, after that, I should have given this person more time. I waited. I rushed to judgment. I've never seen that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I've just seen, I've never seen this. And always they say, I should have moved faster.
I hear you.
And the second thing they always say is, once that happens, then they say, always happens, oh my gosh, it was worse than I ever thought. Because it's like lifting up that rock and you see what's underneath, and people start to say, yes, it was really bad. And you discover the problems are way worse. So if people are saying, wow, I'm wondering if I have a personnel issue, should I move on it? Move on it. Have the upfront conversation. If it doesn't change, it's like I used to have a television show out of Fairfax County. It was not very good, but I never forgot it. A guy said, he said to me, if you can't change the people, change the people.
Right. Move them out, move them in.
Right. Well,
right person on the bus.
Right. So whether it's therapy they need or coaching, the bottom line is do what we can, coach behaviors. If it doesn't move, we have to have the upfront conversation. And quite often they're not in the right fit. It's not the best thing for them. And so it's just really having that upfront conversation. And one thing I want to just add, if people are saying, well, I want more, and we run out of time, there's a 9-step methodology that I wrote a book about a long time ago, and they can have it for free. I'm not trying to sell them on that.
Good. So tell us about that.
Just have them reference your show and send us an email. And we can our website is justbehonest.com. And there's a contact sheet. They can send us an email, info@stevengaffney.com. Reference the show, and we'll send them that book I wrote. And it goes through the 9 steps. We're giving some key elements, but I don't want people feeling, oh, he's holding it back and trying to sell something. No, I want to help you.
Yeah, I get that. Going back to the analogy of letting the person go and saying, we should have done this earlier. What's your thought on that? We have this sort of this embarrassment, this regret, that it's not just that we saw just how bad it was, but we also saw how much we didn't share the truth and the honesty and provide that feedback. And it becomes also apparent at some point, like we realize that we are part of this, but we know we can't fix it because it's too late. It's already that horse has already left the barn or whatever. Yeah. But it's almost like let's not only let them go, but let's let go of the shame that we feel about holding them on and not doing a good job leading them or not being transparent as much. Are you seeing? I see that sometimes happening, and then we get really quick pulling off the Band-Aid. But the way we pull off the Band-Aid is almost like it's too abrupt. Like I want to let people go as ambassadors for my organization. When you're an alumni for your college, you're always getting letters from here into perpetuity about, you're part of the team, right? Even though you left school 30 years ago. I mean, I would love it if people could be let go of in a way with dignity, so that they're still speaking well of the organization. They still feel that maybe it didn't fit, whatever reason, but we're doing it in such a way that it wasn't so abrupt that it just rips off the skin. Thoughts on that?
Well, so this goes back to what we're saying is poor performers receiving poor feedback. We got to ask ourselves, is the feedback very specific? Is it actionable? And then are we also upfront and saying, look, this has got to change within this time frame. If it doesn't, and I'm not trying to threaten, I just want to let you know what will happen. And so the reason why I say this is because I've also seen where people are surprised and blindsided when they're let go or changes, or they had no idea that their boss was unhappy or other people are unhappy. Yeah. It's just, again, getting the unsaid said. So it's really, we have to ask ourselves, if we want to treat people with dignity, it's about just being honest and letting them know. When people say, well, I don't want to hurt them or whatever. No, we don't want to hurt ourselves. We don't want the confrontation.
Right.
If we really care, as they say, sharing is caring. Yeah. Sharing is caring. It really is saying, look, I want to just be upfront. And so here's an easy method. What the notice are, the facts, then share your assessment of the facts, and then make a request. So, for example, it could be, listen, I notice I want to give you some feedback. I notice the reports are coming in always at 5 o'clock rather than 3 o'clock. And then it's causing a chain of reactions that we have to delay things. And I notice other deadlines are being missed by days. What's going on? And then the person will tell you, and then do you need some coaching? What do we need to do? But here's what I want to let you know. We have to change this immediately. Because if we don't give a time frame, somebody might say, oh, they gave me some feedback, but I have some time. And, but it's like, what time frame are we doing? What runway are we talking about? We're not doing any service to the other person when we hold that back. It's much better to be too hard than too soft, because at least they know the truth. Just think about it this way. How often have you thought, I might have had my feelings hurt, but I'll get over it, but I won't get over that they just didn't tell me? And that's
really great. Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think that emotional safety goes two ways. I mean, there can be like, I don't feel emotionally safe with the feedback you gave me, and so I'm having a hard time with that. But there's also the emotional safety of me giving you the feedback. I feel some risk to be able to share, even though I know it's caring, to your point. But who knows how you're going to react to this? And I don't like conflict, and I'm upset about the fact that you're upset. And maybe because of the fact that we're having so many people move in and out of the organization, I don't want to hold you accountable right now, because what if you leave? What if I keep thinking about healthcare. There's a big issue. And I'm wondering if accountability has been sort of like hit in the face a little bit, because we're afraid that the feedback we give will be the reason why somebody says, screw this, I'm going to another company who's going to pay me $8 more an hour with better benefits and, et cetera. This is my excuse that I've been waiting for. Now I have it. And I don't know that it's true, but I think sometimes it's in the minds of our managers who say, I know I got to give this person feedback, but what if they quit?
Oh, I think it's a big issue. And it's like, well, I want to treat this person right. And I could share with you, I was working with a CEO, and she had hired someone who was just off, and it was a big problem. And she just wouldn't pull the trigger. And her reason was, I want to do everything I can to help this person. And so what I helped her reframe the situation. I said, if you really care for the organization, you've got to care for everyone. Leadership is not about leading one, it's leading everyone. Yeah. And here's the thing, high achievers want to be with other high achievers.
Yes.
So if high achievers want to be with high achievers, and we have a low achiever and we're not doing something about it, we're doing a disservice to everyone else. And we're going to lose the great people. So, and I see that. In fact, there's another client of mine I've been brought in because they've had retention problems. And the retention problems is because they haven't managed the poor performers. And the reason why they haven't managed the poor performers is because they're worried about, workload and whatnot. So they're losing the high performers because they're not managing the low performers. And it doesn't mean you got to go in and just fire everybody. It just means, it means that we have to lead the entire organization. We owe it to everyone else in our life, and even at home. Because, we carry that at home and vice versa. We owe it to people to tell the truth and manage the whole situation so that everybody benefits and we keep those high achievers.
It's funny you mentioned the home thing. It's like, that's where we probably learned all this stuff, to your point earlier on. It's not safe to be able to provide feedback to your kids and whatever, we watch children grow up. Steven, I would love to keep this conversation going for many, many more hours, but we're going to have to start closing off here. How can people follow you, gain your knowledge? I just think that what you're doing is fantastic, and I so appreciate your thoughts and your tips and your insights. How can people connect with you?
Thank you for asking. So the easiest way is to go to our website, justbehonest.com. And there's a contact form and I'm more than happy to follow up and talk to people if people are interested in the work we do with organizations or around high achieving teams, whatever the case may be. Also, if they want to send me an email directly, it's steven@stevengaffney.com, steven@stevengaffney.com. So there's all kinds of ways, whether it's Just Be Honest through that website, our website, or steven@stevengaffney.com, whatever they want to do. And I want to remind folks that if they mention your show, just email us and we'll send them that booklet around the 9 strategies to have honest communication with anyone.
Yeah, if you want to, again, I want to be a part of that as well. I would love it if I could get that, because maybe we can do something with a blog and we could promote that, because I really do think that people are hungry for this type of information and they need some guides. They need a way to be able to figure out how to do this. I don't think any of this is rocket science. I think we just need a process to be able to do that. And you've really laid out a lot of that today. So I really appreciate your time on that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on too.
It's been great.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.